I discovered that I was transgender when I was 16 years old. And I found out what transgender meant, not through a supportive teacher who could have pointed me or my family towards resources, or through a textbook that had definitions or context, but through a Facebook post that where comments advocated for conversion therapy and talked about how being trans was a mental illness. Thousands of other LGBTQ students had the same or a similar experience to mine, and legislators across the country want to make sure that another generation of LGBTQ students suffer in public schools under the guise of offering parents protection and choice over their children's education. Parental rights and education bills, also called Don't Say Gay or No Promo Homo bills, work by, quote, enacting blanket prohibition on all discussion of LGBTQ sexuality and gender-related topics, unquote, according to the Cornell Journal of Law and Public Policy. Bills like the one recently enacted in Florida cause harm to the community by stigmatizing gay and trans identities, discriminating against queer students, and exposing them to increased levels of harassment and violence at school, and by paving the way for other similar bills to be passed in other states. It is essential for Congress members to vote for federal policies and protections that relate to public education and protect LGBTQ students. Don't Say Gay bills don't not only deprive students of a positive exposure to the LGBTQ community, they harm in a variety of ways, including discouraging or prohibiting students from attending school dances or engaging in PDA with their same-sex partners, preventing them from creating gay-straight alliance clubs, permitting them from wearing certain gendered clothing, particularly in schools with uniforms, and generally creating a hostile environment for queer students. Not mentioning or being allowed to discuss gay or trans identities stigmatizes them and, quote, reaffirms the sense of inferiority and disapproval that LGBTQ youth already endure by silencing their experiences, unquote. When faculty create an aura of silence or even condemnation of gay and trans people, harassment and assault become commonplace. In a 2017 National School Climate Survey, 95% of queer students reported that they heard homophobic remarks from other students at school. 56% said that they heard homophobic remarks from staff or teachers. 87% heard transphobic remarks from other students, while 71% heard them from staff or teachers. Over 70% of LGBTQ students are verbally harassed at school, 28% are physically harassed, 48% are electronically harassed, and 56% are sexually harassed for their sexual orientation or gender identity. Bills that are already in place, like the ones enacted recently in Florida, serve as guidelines for how other states can abuse their queer students. Only 7 states require LGBTQ inclusion be mandatory, and the recent wave in Indiana and Tennessee could only be the start. 15 state-level bills aim to ban or severely limit LGBTQ topics in K-12 education, in addition to the 5 that already have similar regulations in place. The rules range in severity from banning LGBTQ education in K through 3rd grades to categorizing homosexuality with sexual misconduct and rape in sex education classes, like in Mississippi. But there's only so much that educating the public or staging student walkouts can do. Congress must act to protect queer students from the high rates of harassment and the disproportionately high rates of attempted suicide the community faces. Federal rules that list sexual orientation or gender identity specifically help students to fight the laws when they appear in their own states. The Biden administration's proposed additions to Title IX would add gender identity to the list of protected demographics. Punitive measures that cut or threaten to cut federal funding to districts that have homophobic or transphobic school policies provide incentive for those states to remove their laws. Quote, apologies and other reparative measures can serve to acknowledge past wrongdoing and restore dignity to victims, unquote, according to Time. But it cannot undo the homophobia or transphobia that it has already instilled in generations of students, or make up for the violence that that homophobia has already caused. Obviously, some people believe that parental rights and education bills are necessary, or they never would have been passed in the first place. But the ideas that these are based on are false or hateful. Defenders claim that they're protecting children from being recruited into the LGBTQ community based on the laughable idea that learning about gay people is enough to make you gay. In reality, learning about LGBTQ identities gives straight students the tolerance of their queer classmates and gives queer students the opportunity and vocabulary to understand themselves rather than continuing to suffer in silence. Some argue that, quote, children will begin to see such lifestyles as normal when instead they should be condemned and corrected, unquote. But that is a homophobic notion, and telling children that they should condemn certain groups is indoctrination, the very thing that far-right groups accuse the LGBTQ community of doing. Nobody is proposing that we teach first graders about gay sex. Elementary school students barely learn about menstruation or erections, for heaven's sake. What I do want to do is protect queer students from being told that they or their families are wrong by their teachers, from being assaulted by their peers who've been taught to condemn gay and trans people. I want kids to be safe to be out at school without their counselors being required to tell their parents and place them in dangerous home situations or at risk of homelessness. I want for queer students to not worry their states will follow Florida's example. And I want the rate of attempted suicide in the trans community to drop below 40%. And none of these things are possible unless Congress members start to actually fight the Don't Say Gay bills that are spreading across the United States. Are there any questions?
Yes. It seems like the number of young people identifying as LGBTQ is rising and keeps increasing. So do you know if it has anything to do with what they're being taught in school?
Sexuality is based on a number of different biological and psychological factors. And I would like to point out that having a cis-het education didn't make any of the gay or trans people that went through school straight. The increase in young people identifying as LGBTQ is likely because they feel safe to come out and are less likely to be ostracized or attacked for doing so.
Don't parents have a right to have a say in their kids' education?
Parents have always had the right to opt their children out of sex ed, and nobody is proposing that that change. But parents don't have the right to tell everyone's children to opt out of certain parts of sex ed, or the right to spread misinformation about minorities they happen not to like in public schools. Thank you. My sources include, come on, share the screen. My sources include Barbeauld, Schultz, and Arcion, Kowisk, Graytek, Zergone, and everyone who worked on the 2017 National School Climate Survey, and McGovern from the Cornell Journal of Law and Public Policy.